I'm Kirtop, and these are 100 tombs that scientists are still afraid to open. Egypt and the swastika. The more I studied the archives about NRB, the clearer it became. It was important for the Nazis not just to find ancient artifacts, they needed to place themselves in a grand history, to create a narrative where Aryans were not just a people, but the direct heirs of the most ancient civilizations. Egypt held a special place in this system, not because of the pyramids and mummies, but because of its symbols and rituals. They called the swastika the sun cross. For them, it was not just a symbol, it was a code. The swastika is indeed found in the cultures of India, Tibet, and China, and in Egypt at least as an indirect symbol. The movement of the sun, the four directions of the cult. They saw this as confirmation of their ideas. Sometimes it was far-fetched, sometimes quite convincing. Before the war, some researchers associated with the NRB did indeed visit Egypt unofficially. They were interested in ancient books, burial rituals, ideas about the afterlife, and how the Egyptians connected power, magic, and order. The Nazis saw this as a system, not a religion, but a mechanism of control, as if the ancients knew something that had been forgotten, and they had come to restore it. I looked at photographs from those expeditions. People in SS uniforms standing by temples, stone bas-reliefs decorated with runes. It wasn't just imitation, it was an attempt to create their own new religion, not relying on symbols that inspire strength. When Hitler spoke about returning to the past, he didn't mean Prussia. He looked further back, into millennia, into civilizations that had disappeared but left a trace, and he wanted that trace to lead back to them through the ages. Infant warriors. In southern Italy, in the municipality of Pantecognano Faiana, builders began digging a pit at the site of a former tobacco factory and called in archaeologists who came and made a discovery. 34 tombs from the 4th and 3rd centuries BC were left by the Samnites, an ancient Italian people who fought with Rome for several centuries and were eventually absorbed by it. Samnite tombs themselves are regularly found in the area, so there's nothing sensational about that. But when they started examining the contents, one detail kept bothering them. 15 out of the 34 tombs were those of children ranging from newborns to 10-year-olds, which is rare in itself. Children's burials are usually less well preserved, but that's not the main point. In several of the children's tombs, they found bronze belts, wide and well preserved. Among the Samnites, such belts were a symbol of an adult male warrior. They were worn as a sign of status and belonging to the military class. The child is 5 years old. Such a belt isn't right in terms of size, age, or significance. So when and why was it placed in a child's grave? Scientists offer two explanations. The first is that the belt was a symbol of who this child was supposed to become. He died before his time, but his parents buried him as a warrior, as if giving him in death what he didn't have time to receive in life. The second explanation is even more interesting. It is possible that the Samnites had a custom of dedicating children as warriors from a very early age, long before a child could hold a weapon. Something like an oath from the cradle. Neither version has been proven, but both suggest one thing: these people saw childhood very differently than we do. In men's tombs, there are spear and javelin tips, while in women's tombs, there are rings and ornaments. All the burials are arranged in family groups, with 34 tombs next to each other, and in half of them, children are found with adult warrior belts on their small bones. The ideal woman of the late Paleolithic. For a long time, scientists could not say exactly what Venus figurines symbolized. There were different theories. They could have been lucky charms, protective amulets, or even erotic figurines. The most common theory stated that these were figurines of the mother goddess, worshipped by people of the Paleolithic era. Her image can be traced in all world mythologies. She symbolized the continuation of the family line and fertility. Recent studies have proven that Venus actually represents what people of the Paleolithic era considered the ideal woman. Moreover, depending on where ancient people lived, these ideas differed somewhat. Experts from the University of Colorado analyzed dozens of Venuses and concluded that the figures are carved too realistically. The Venuses are either pregnant or suffering from obesity. In their opinion, they cannot simply be symbols of the mother goddess. The oldest figurines are slimmer than the later Venuses. This relates to the climate becoming colder during the late Paleolithic period. And the coldest period occurred around the 25th to 17th millennia BC, but the Paleolithic Venuses were not just temporary amulets. Most likely they were passed down from generation to generation, from mother to daughter. Many of them have holes. Apparently they were worn around the neck as amulets. The village kept the secret for 500 years. In May 2026, in the English village of Bloxham, it's a small place in Oxfordshire, with about 1,200 residents, a typical quiet British village with a pub and a church, something interesting happened. For centuries, the locals told each other about the underground tunnels beneath the village. Everyone thought it was just a legend. It's the kind of story people tell by the fireplace, but forget about by morning. Archaeologists politely agreed, but never took it seriously. But in May 2026, a team of researchers finally decided to check. And it turned out that the villagers weren't making it up. There really is a system of underground tunnels beneath Bloxham, hidden, branching, stretching in different directions under houses and streets. What had been passed down for centuries as local legend turned out to be a real engineering structure. What shocks me in this story is how many such legends around the world are still waiting their turn. After all, the underground tunnels in Bloxheim are not an isolated case. All over Britain, all over Europe, there are hundreds of similar local legends about underground passages, about hidden rooms, about something being under our village. Most of them have never been checked by anyone, because it's folklore, not serious science. Bloxheim showed that sometimes it's worth believing the local villagers. How many of these places exist worldwide now? How many grandmothers in Italian villages tell their grandchildren about underground passages beneath houses, while the grandchildren laugh and pretend to believe them? And how many of these passages actually exist? No one knows because no one has checked. It is still unknown exactly who built these tunnels and for what purpose. The age and purpose are still being studied and the work continues. These could be medieval passages that were built all over Britain for a variety of purposes. From food storage to secret passages, these could be even older structures. But the very fact of their discovery is already important for history. People have talked about them for centuries, and they turned out to be right. This might be the smallest scale story we have today. Tunnels? Not an ancient civilization. But this one seems important to me as a principle, and as a reminder that we shouldn't dismiss things just because they don't fit into our usual picture of the world. How often have we laughed at folk legends as mere superstitions, only to later discover that some myths or folklore, like Troy, turned out to be real. Until Schliemann found it in the 1870s, everyone told him he was chasing a fairy tale. But he found the city. Let Atlantis remain a myth. But under the waters of the Black Sea, scientists found submerged Neolithic settlements, a real village that went underwater 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. Stone tomb. In the north of Morocco, where the Tangier Peninsula faces Gibraltar, archaeologists found not just a cemetery, but an entire ritual map. 3 ancient necropolises, burials in stone boxes, standing stones, geometric signs and caves with wall paintings. All this is in a region that archaeologists had hardly ever talked about before. One of the tombs was dated precisely 2000 BC. This is a shield, a rectangular niche carved into the stones with slabs on top. It's not an easy job. It took a lot of time and effort. And all this just to bury a body in a strictly defined shape. But why? On the walls nearby, there are interlocking triangles, patterns made of 8 overlapping triangles. Sometimes they are interpreted as female figures or symbols of goddesses. There are also circles with dots, waves, squares with lines. And all of this resembles a picture encrypted in stone, but we don't yet understand the language of this picture. There are standing stones all around, some taller than a person. They could have served as both boundaries and places of power. Perhaps it was here that ancient people gathered to bury, to pray, to mark something. All of this happened thousands of years ago. Manuscript surprise. Imagine this. You open a medieval folio, expect dusty prayers, and instead you get a full-fledged attraction. Some pages flare up with huge initials, while others are covered with Turonian notes. The old art of shorthand, which today only a couple of dozen specialists in the world can decipher. Then you come across a spread where the letters formed the shapes of constellations, as if the author decided to combine a school primer with the night sky. You turn the page, and in the corner you see a tiny scribble. The scribe was testing his pen, quickly composing a mini medley of poems about birds. Half of the space is taken up by wide margins. Why waste such expensive parchment? It turns out that emptiness here is not really emptiness. It was on these margins that medieval students scribbled marginalia, and later those same margins saved books from mold. The humid air would start to damage the edges of the book, while the text remained untouched. There are also some completely unexpected formats. The bat book. A monk would hang this upside down from his belt. Unfolded, it instantly revealed a calendar, lunar phase tables, and a list of saints for the year. The purple stains in the corners are mold scars. The manuscript was stored in damp conditions, allowing microbes to eat away at the pages. Now scientists are literally counting the fungal growth rings, just like on an old tree. Just imagine how much information is hidden in these cosmetic defects. They use them to date the library's relocations and even revise our understanding of that era's climate. Visual Easter eggs like these turn the manuscript into more than just text. It becomes a real quest. Every note, every unexpected bookmark is a direct portal to the people who wrote, read, and used this book centuries before us. The pyramid of the oldest civilization. The Norte Chico culture, also known as Caral Soup, is considered one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations of the Andes. It existed about 5,000 years ago and achieved significant success in architecture, agriculture, and social organization. Recently, archaeologists discovered a pyramid structure about a kilometer from the sacred city of Caral Soup in the Supi Valley, Peru. The structure is a quadrangular building with a wide staircase leading to the top. Its walls are decorated with massive vertical stones called huancas, which may have had not only a structural, but also a ritual significance. In addition to the pyramid, researchers found 12 public and ceremonial buildings located around the central square, which covers almost 30 meters. This indicates the existence of a small urban center with administrative and religious functions. 3 platforms have been identified in the pyramid, which indicates a complex architectural tradition of the Caral civilization. At the Chupa Chupatzigaro site, archaeologists also discovered a unique geoglyph made in the Sechin style. It depicts a human profile and is probably associated with rituals reflecting access to the region's marine and agricultural resources. 2 alien bases on Earth. American lawyer and ufologist Danny Sheehan claims that he has video recordings confirming the existence of alien bases on Earth. According to him, one of the largest such bases is located in the Pacific Ocean, between the west coast of Mexico and Guadalupe Island, possibly even under the ocean floor. Sheehan is known for his investigations related to UFOs, and in recent years he has actively brought in witnesses to testify before the U.S. Congress. He is convinced that the UFO phenomenon is real and has been present on Earth for a long time. The ships carry living beings from other planets or dimensions. According to him, the underwater base is being monitored. There are already hundreds of videos showing unidentified objects diving underwater and then resurfacing. In addition, Sheehan claims that the military is trying to shoot down these ships and capture their crews. He warns that the government is hiding the truth, but confirmation of the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations is inevitable. 2 2,500-year-old helmets and Dacian treasures. This golden helmet is one of the most famous artifacts of the Dacian culture, dating back to around 450 BC. It is known as the Helmet of Cotofanesti and is considered not only a work of ancient jewelry art, but also a symbol of power and ritual strength. Adorned with eyes, snakes, and mythological scenes, it may have belonged to a priest or a chief who played a sacred role in Dacian society. The helmet seems to gaze at enemies, instilling fear and protecting its owner. On January 25, 2025, this helmet became the victim of a daring robbery. From the Drenthe Museum in Assen, Netherlands, where the Dacia exhibition was being held, several unique exhibits were stolen from the land of gold and silver, including this helmet and 3 royal Dacian bracelets. All the items came from the National History Museum of Romania. The loss of these artifacts was a real blow to cultural heritage. Strange scratches on the stones. The Swedish island of Gotland. Gotland is located in the Baltic Sea, and if you move away from the tourist spots and look carefully at your feet, you start to notice strange things. There are deep scratches on the stones, long, straight, clearly made by someone's hand. And not just one or two, but thousands of such marks all over the island, on boulders, on cliffs, on separate stone blocks. In some places, there are literally dozens on a single stone, while nearby, there isn't a single one. When people started talking about this seriously in the 19th century, the first thing that came to mind was that weapons were sharpened here. The Baltic Islands were a center for trading swords and axes, and the sharpening marks on the stone seemed like a logical explanation. But it quickly turned out that the size and shape of these scratches just weren't suitable for sharpening. Not a single sword or axe from that era would even fit into these narrow grooves. And the strangest thing is, no debris from work was ever found near these stones. No metal shavings, no blade fragments, nothing at all that would suggest anything was ever sharpened here. And then something interesting was discovered. The same kind of grooves can be found in Norway, Finland, and France. There, they're called polissoirs, and are dated to the Neolithic period, the same culture that built dolmens and erected menhirs. Similar traces have been found in Australia and India. All over the world, similar marks are found in stone, and that alone is already strange. Identical scratches made by people who couldn't possibly have known about each other. But nowhere in the world are there as many of them as on Gotland. Scientists have counted more than 3,600 such traces there. Some are right in the cliffs. Some are on separate stones scattered all over the island. Scientists have suggested several theories. The first is astronomical. Many of the grooves are oriented toward the sun or the moon. Perhaps this was a way to track time and seasons. The second theory is ritual. The symbolic marks are connected with fertility or death cults. And finally, the practical theory, polishing wooden poles or bone tools, the traces of which simply have not survived. None of the theories explain why people on different continents, who could not have known about each other, created the same shapes. Why are there many grooves in some spots but none nearby? And why put so much effort into hard limestone? There are 3,600 grooves on one island, and there is still no answer. What do you think it is? Write your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to hear your theories. A stash of Viking gold jewelry. 7 bracelets, 6 gold and 1 silver, dating back to 900 BC, were found in a field in Jutland by treasure hunters known as the Rainbow Power Team. The 900-gram find was made at the same site where, in 1911, a Viking-era gold chain weighing 67 grams was discovered, and experts believe that it was most likely part of the same collection. The heaviest previous find of this kind weighed 750 grams. One of the archaeologists who took part in the excavation, Mary Agartha Larsen, said, "We really felt like we had found gold at the end of the rainbow when we found the first gold. But when more appeared, it was almost unreal." Lars Grundvad from the Sanderskoga Museum, who was called by the group of enthusiasts halfway through the discovery, said that all this time he had a suspicion that there were more precious stones hidden in this area. The museum described some of the gold items as being made in the gelling style, a type associated with the Viking elite. According to Peter Pins, a Viking expert and curator at the Danish National Museum, the bracelets were most likely oath rings that tribal leaders gave to their loyal followers. Imperial purple in children's graves. This is a story I didn't plan to include, not until I realized how much it changes the way we thought about the Roman Empire. York, United Kingdom. May 2, 2025 York is one of the main Roman cities in Britain. The remains of Roman walls and gates still stand there. There are a lot of excavations there. Archaeologists are studying Roman infant burials. Such finds are regularly discovered in Britain. This is a well-known tradition of that era. It's routine work. But in these particular burials, traces of fabric were found. And when the fabric was analyzed, it turned out to be Tyrian purple, the very same imperial dye that, in the Roman Empire, was literally worth more than gold. A single cloak could cost a fortune. It was obtained from special sea mollusks. And to get enough dye for one cloak, thousands of these mollusks had to be processed. Only emperors and the highest-ranking aristocrats wore purple. According to some sources, wearing it without permission was considered equivalent to treason. And here is this purple on the burial shroud of an infant in provincial York. Let's think about what this could mean. On one hand, there were people in York of such high status that they could afford to bury their children in fabric worn by the emperor himself. This would mean that provincial York was much more important in the imperial hierarchy than we thought. On the other hand, there was a tradition in Rome that we know almost nothing about, a special attitude toward deceased children, some kind of ritual specifically connected to imperial purple. Neither of these versions fits with what we think we know about the Roman Empire, and that makes the discovery especially valuable, because it suggests that we are missing something in the history of ancient Egypt. Let's first figure out what Tyrian purple is, because without that, the significance of the discovery isn't clear. Tyrian purple is not just an expensive fabric, just so we're clear. 1 gram of this dye cost more than the average annual income of an ordinary Roman citizen. It was literally the most expensive substance in the Roman Empire. The law directly restricted who had the right to wear it, and here is this fabric in children's graves in a provincial British town. You know, what amazes me about this discovery isn't even the fabric itself. It's that it changes everything about the history of Rome. 2,000 years of study, thousands of books, hundreds of films, and then you find purple on children's bones in York, and you realize that you don't understand anything. 5 skeletons that shouldn't be there. In the spring of 2024, archaeologists in Poland made a strange discovery. Under the rubble of one of the buildings in the Wolf's Lair complex, the former residence of the Nazi leadership, human remains were found. 5 skeletons. 3 adults, a teenager, and an infant. All without feet and hands, no identification, no clothing, no explanation. This part of the complex belonged to Hermann Göring. It was here that he held closed meetings. There were no outsiders here, and there certainly couldn't have been any burials. The area was heavily guarded. Only a few people had access to these estates and rooms. Who these people were is still unknown. No dental prostheses, papers, or dog tags were found. Only skeletons, strangely arranged, as if someone had deliberately staged the scene. The theory of an execution? But then who is the infant? The theory of a ritual? Archaeologists do not rule it out. In the final days of the Reich, something irrational, almost religious, was happening. Hitler himself was convinced of the sacred role of this war. He believed that the struggle of the Third Reich was not just politics, but the revival of an ancient order. Why did these particular bodies end up at the center of the lair? Why weren't they taken away, buried, but simply left under the floor? And why, during the retreat, did the Nazis spend their efforts not on saving, but on destroying the bunkers, blowing everything up, almost as if they feared not the Soviet army, but future archaeologists? Maybe it's not about these bodies at all, but about what was hidden nearby, something that wasn't supposed to remain after them, something they buried to keep secret. Rolex watch at the bottom of the ocean. Last summer, Australian surfer Matt Kadhihi was diving off the coast of Noosa, looking for something interesting on the ocean floor. Usually you find lost fins, snorkeling masks, and other beach trash there, but this time there was a Rolex Submariner watch lying on the bottom. One of the most iconic models of the Swiss brand, and it costs about $20,000. And most interestingly, it was still working. They had been lying on the ocean floor for several years, and they were still running. On the back cover, Matt found an engraving, presented in 1971. Most people in his place would have just sold it, but Matt started looking for the owner through social media, and he found them pretty quickly. A man named Rick reached out himself and said that his father gave him this watch more than 50 years ago for winning a sailing race. Rick never parted with the gift his whole life until he lost it in the ocean in 2019, several years on the bottom. Then a random diver found them, and the watch returned to its owner in working condition. The phrase, reliable as a Swiss watch, took on a whole new meaning. A room under the influence. High in the Andes, within the ancient Chavin de Huantar complex, archaeologists stumbled upon a room they weren't supposed to find. It was completely buried, with no visible entrances, no windows, no doors, just a narrow crawl space, as if someone had deliberately hidden this space from prying eyes. Inside, there were 23 artifacts. All of them are connected to the use of psychoactive substances. Some are thin, hollow bird bones, sharp, perfectly crafted, almost like tubes. Research showed that traces of tobacco and DMT were found on them. DMT is a substance found in ayahuasca. And this is where the questions begin. What was the purpose of this small dark room with the inhalation tubes? Why was it isolated? Why was it built in such a way that it would later be hidden forever? One of the authors of the study says this is not spontaneous shamanism. This is a ritual strictly controlled and formalized. And perhaps it was not meant for everyone. Only the elite had access to these practices. Perhaps priests or ruling castes? Because hallucinations here are not just a journey within oneself. This is a mechanism of power. A small room, 2 or 3 people darkness, and a hallucinogen that changes the perception of reality. Such conditions could create contact with the gods, trance, visions. And if people usually believe that priests really talk to spirits, then the priests could use this as a tool, both for control and for governance. Ritual rice. In the northern Retidian cave, archaeologists found rice husk imprints on ceramics that are at least 3,500, 3,500 years old. The only traces are the thinnest starch film and phytoliths. But that's enough to confirm that the settlers reached Guam carrying rice across 2,000, 2,300 kilometers of open ocean. Fields, terraces, and sickles were never found. That means the grains were carried not for food, but for ritual. Maybe once a year, to remind the spirits of their ancestors about their distant home in Taiwan. In the hands of the islanders, rice turned from everyday food into a symbol of origin. And that's why tiny traces on pottery turned out to be more important than an entire cemetery of bone harpoons. 100 Iron Age artifacts archaeologists in Denmark made an incredible discovery. More than 100 types of weapons, including spears, swords, knives, and a rare chainmail shirt. All of this was discovered under the house of an Iron Age chieftain. This collection is about 1,500 years old, and it could have been part of a ritual offering after a military victory. The weapons were found under 2 5th-century houses, which probably belonged to an influential chieftain capable of gathering an army. Among the items are 119 spears, 8 swords, 5 knives, an axe, and a chainmail shirt that presumably belonged to the chieftain himself. Such armor was expensive and difficult to make, which highlights its importance. In addition to weapons, archaeologists discovered bronze neck rings, known as oath rings, which were symbols of power in the Iron Age. Fragments of harness, a bronze horn, and other metal objects that still need to be studied were also found. In the 1st to 4th centuries, Denmark was on the outskirts of the Roman Empire and was part of Greater Germania. The local inhabitants were mostly farmers, but Romans like Julius Caesar mentioned the fierce Germanic warriors. Some scholars suggest that the Romans might have supplied local tribes with weapons to maintain order on the borders. Ruins of the most ancient civilization underwater. In the early 2000s, a team of researchers led by the Canadian company Advanced Digital Communications made a sensational discovery off the coast of Cuba. At a depth of about 600 to 750 meters on the ocean floor, strange structures resembling stone buildings were discovered. These structures looked like organized rows of giant stone blocks. Some of them had a regular rectangular shape and resembled massive walls or pyramid-like structures. The initial results of underwater research conducted using modern sonar led to the hypothesis of a possible sunken city that could have been swallowed by the ocean tens of thousands of years ago. According to some estimates, the age of these ruins may exceed 50,000 years, which is significantly older than the earliest known civilizations such as Sumer and ancient Egypt. This makes the possible discoveries even more intriguing, as it suggests the existence of ancient and possibly highly developed cultures that science knows nothing about yet. Some scientists believe that these ruins may represent the remains of an ancient city built before the last ice age, when the sea level was significantly lower. There is a theory that this area could have been inhabited by ancient peoples who were later forced to leave their homes due to the rising sea level. This hypothesis is supported by proponents of the theory about the existence of ancient sunken continents, such as Atlantis, described in the works of Plato. Some geologists suggest that these formations may be the result of natural geological processes, such as erosion, earthquakes, and other movements of the Earth's crust. Further research and analysis of the underwater ruins off the coast of Cuba requires significant resources and time. Let's hope that the authorities will find the means to study these ancient ruins. The mystery of the ancient Siloam Tunnel. Ancient Jerusalem was located on a natural elevation and was already well protected on its own. However, such a location for the city was also a problem. The fact is that the only source of drinking water was the Gihon underground spring, located on the slope of a ravine. To make the city impregnable, it was necessary to surround it with high stone walls. But in this case, the Gihon would have to remain outside the city walls, and in the event of a siege, Jerusalem would be left without water. To fix this situation, at the end of the 9th or the beginning of the 8th century, BC, 2 massive towers were built around the Gihon, whose walls were connected to the city walls, and a tunnel 533 meters long was dug to the spring deep in the rock, which was made with incredible precision. The elevation difference between the tunnel's start and end is just 30 centimeters. It is unclear what technologies were used to achieve such precision almost 3,000 years ago, but it was enough to direct the waters of the Gihon into the city, into the specially constructed Siloam pool, which has not survived to this day. In 1880, children discovered a stone slab with barely visible ancient inscriptions on a rock in the eastern wall, just 6 meters from the exit of the Siloam tunnel. Surprisingly, by that time, the tunnel had been very well studied. The first written mention of this remarkable structure dates to 1625. The Italian religious figure, Francesco Quaresmi. 200 years later, the tunnel was further examined by the biblical scholar Edward Robinson and the British archaeologist Charles Warren. But no one noticed this slab. Most likely, this was because it was heavily covered with mineral deposits. After the slab was treated with an acid solution, a text appeared, written in the Paleo-European alphabet. Despite some losses in the text, scientists managed to read it. The slab described how the tunnel was built. It turns out that they started digging from both sides. The calculations were so precise that the 2 tunnels met at the designated point. Moreover, this happened not on a straight section, but at an angle. Researchers do not know how such precise alignment was achieved at that time. A theory suggests stonecutters and quarrymen navigated by following sounds from above. Surface workers struck the rock, guiding others to break through toward the noise. In the last line of the inscription, it is said that the height of the rock above the workers' heads was 50 meters. This means that the ancient engineers had very precise information about the depth of the tunnel. The treasures of the Alans, the southern outskirts of the Chechen village of Alkan Kala. It has long been listed in the archaeological register, but the excavations of 2025 sharply increased interest. At the bottom of a narrow tomb carefully lined with stone, a pendant glittered, a thin gold ring with 5-faceted almandine inlays. Slightly to the right lay a glass bowl the color of a melting glacier. The chemical composition confirmed Byzantine or Persian origin. Among the horse's bones, they found bronze cheek pieces, and along the warrior's legs there were scabbards with stylized griffins, typical of Sasanian art. The burial is dated to the late 9th century, a time when Alania controlled the passes between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. The richness of the inventory indicates that we are looking at a member of the elite, possibly a representative of the rulers of Dorial. But the jeweler's technique suggests that the pendant was made locally. The gold has a typical platinum admixture from Caspian alluvial deposits, and the granulation uses an adhesive composition also found in Pakhar. Taken together, the tomb destroys the old image of nomads as mere intermediaries. Alan society at the end of the first millennium was more complex. They had their own jewelers, long-distance trade in glass, and close ties with Iran and Byzantium. Most importantly, there was a desire to immortalize status in gold and horse harness. This might have been in textbooks too. Imagine that you are an Egyptologist. You have spent your whole life studying ancient Egypt. You wrote a dissertation. You teach courses at the university. You have published several books. And one fine day, new results of soil analysis under the Sphinx are placed on your desk. There are traces of water erosion, very deep ones, the kind that only happens after centuries of heavy rains. Such rains last occurred in Egypt 10 to 12,000 years ago. That means if it's true, the Sphinx is 2 or 3 times older than everything we know about Egyptian civilization. So what are you going to do with that? Most Egyptologists did exactly what you would probably do in their place. They explained that it was a mistake, or that it was the wrong type of stone. Because to admit that the Sphinx is not from 2500 BC but at least from the 10th millennium means admitting that there was an advanced civilization we know nothing about. That's not a small correction in a textbook. That's a complete revision of all human history from scratch. And it's no wonder that nobody wants such changes. Geologist Robert Schoch, who first described this water erosion in the 1990s, is still publishing and still hasn't received a single clear refutation. Only condescending comments that he doesn't understand the specifics of the Egyptian climate. He's now over 60. I wonder if he'll get recognition during his lifetime. The history of science shows that there is a chance, but sometimes you have to wait a very long time. But for now, let's turn to what has already been definitely confirmed. At the same time, the Egyptian authorities did not allow independent research there for a long time. The official reason is not explained. What's underneath it is unknown. Seismic studies in the 1990s showed possible voids in the foundation. There are voids there. No one has checked what's inside them. Desert Castle, in the middle of the dunes in the Algerian desert, stands a ruin. Lonely, without roads, without a name. Tourists don't come here. There are hardly any satellite images. The place is called Xardra, but that's not official. Xar means palace or castle in Berber, and Dra is the name of a river that once flowed nearby. No one knows who built this castle. There are no exact dates nor any remains of a settlement around it, only stone outlines against the sand. It feels as if the structure was cut out of time and simply forgotten. It's remarkable that despite geolocation, drones, and expeditions, some places remain almost unknown. Maybe these ruins are the most important of all, because they don't fit into the usual picture. This has been preserved for 20 million years. In the mid-19th century, farmers in Sioux County, Nebraska, began to notice strange things right in their fields. Stone spirals were sticking out of the ground, twisted perfectly like a corkscrew, as thick as a human arm, and some were taller than a person. No one understood what they were or where they came from, and pretty quickly people started calling them devil's corkscrews, because there just wasn't a normal explanation. In 1891, a scientist finally came to see them, geologist Erwin Barber. He studied the samples and found out that the spirals were actually fossils. The sand-filled tubes with fibrous walls were clearly of biological origin, but he couldn't figure out exactly what they were. The first theory was about giant freshwater sponges. This theory seemed logical right up until the geologists noticed that the rock surrounding the corkscrews was nothing like the bottom of an ancient lake. It looked more like a dry steppe. Barber switched to the theory about petrified plants, but then everyone noticed the bones. Inside the spirals were the bones of small rodents. And even in the Cretaceous period, plants didn't drag rodents inside themselves. In 1893, two scientists independently came to the same conclusion. These were burrows, ancient burrows that filled with sand and became fossilized. Barber didn't give up and said that the shape was too perfect for the dwelling of some animal, that no animal digs so perfectly. Scratches on the inner walls, claw marks left in the soft earth, settled the argument. In 1905, the culprit was identified as Paleocastor, an ancient beaver the size of a marmot that lived here 20 million years ago, with short tails and small ears, and front teeth that grew quickly so they wouldn't wear down from constant digging. This small animal braced its hind legs on the central axis and screwed itself into the ground, creating the perfect spiral. At a depth of about a meter, the burrow widened into side chambers for sleeping and raising the young. Sometimes there were separate recesses, which scientists believe were used as toilets or water containers, and the spiral entrance protected against predators. It's easy to stick a paw into a straight burrow, but much harder into a spiral one. Paleocastors disappeared when the climate on the planet became dry and hot, and forests gave way to endless plains. But their burrows still stick out of the hills in Nebraska National Park 22 million years later, with a shape so perfect that a world-renowned geologist couldn't figure out what it was for 40 years. Mysterious stone boxes. In South America, in the high Peruvian Andes, at the border of the Pamperomas and Caceres del Peru regions, there is an unusual and mysterious chain of stone boxes. According to scientists, these artifacts were hand-carved several thousand years ago. What is especially striking is the incredible precision with which these boxes were made. Local historians and archaeologists admit that the numerous archaeological sites in the Huelas province have hardly been studied so far. Kakakaharumi is a mountain archaeological site located at an altitude of more than 3,700 meters above sea level. On the mountain, you can see 8 stone box artifacts, which are squares carved into the rock with amazing precision. Currently, the authorities of Pamparomos, and Casares del Peru are holding meetings with representatives of the Lacta Cosmo communities. The fact is that Kakakaharumi borders the territories of these communities. The idea of promoting the Kakakaharumi archaeological complex as a tourist attraction is being considered. 50,000 years and no explanation. In 1997, American archaeologist Albert Goudet began excavating a mound in South Carolina, a place called Topper. Even then, he found a tool that was 15,000 years old. That alone was already a problem, because according to the generally accepted version, people came to America no earlier than 12,000 years ago through the Bering Strait. Well, the scientists grumbled and decided, fine, apparently they move faster than we thought. It's something you can live with if you don't think about it too much. But in January 2026, new results came from 2 laboratories at once, from deeper layers of the same hill. 2 independent laboratories, different methods, and the same result. 50,000 years. Now that's something you can't just live with. 50,000 years is 11 times further into the past than the Egyptian pyramids. At that time, Neanderthals were roaming Europe. There was no land route to America. The sea level was different. The Bering Land Bridge hadn't appeared yet. So there was absolutely no way a human could have been in South Carolina 50,000 years ago. But the tools are right there. The official response is silence. And this isn't the first time. When data clashes too strongly with what people accept as true, the first reaction is almost always the same. Not, let's check, but this is probably a mistake. Not because scientists are bad people or do this on purpose, but because, like everyone else, they have something to lose. Dissertations, grants, university positions, reputations they've built over years. If the 50,000-year date is confirmed, it won't just mean rewriting one article, but an entire field of science. And that's painful. It's easier to wait. No conferences, no urgent expeditions, just silence and cautious wording in private conversations like, it requires further study. Because discussing this publicly means admitting that the entire theory of the settlement of the American continent, which is taught everywhere, needs to be revised. And that means other people's dissertations, other people's careers, other people's reputations. Nobody wants that. And that's why it's so important that a few researchers still say out loud that we need to keep digging. Because if people were in South Carolina 50,000 years ago, they couldn't have lived only there. There must be traces somewhere else. We just haven't started looking yet. One person dug in one place for 30 years and found something. Imagine what will happen when such places start being searched systematically. It's only a matter of time. And maybe that's exactly why some people prefer not to rush. Although the honest answer here is that the longer you wait, the more questions pile up. All across North and South America, sites that are 20, 25, even 30,000 years old keep being discovered. Each one can be disputed individually, but together they form a picture that's getting harder and harder to ignore. Topper isn't the last inconvenient discovery in this part of the world. It's just the most recent and the most convincingly documented so far. Still, several researchers are saying out loud that new expeditions are needed all along the East Coast. Some suggest that the first Americans didn't travel through the tundra, but along the Pacific coast by boat, and all their campsites are now underwater because the ocean level has risen by 120 meters since then. That would explain why there are no traces. For now, it's just a theory. But at least it tries to answer the question. There's one thing I think is important. We say that mainstream science stays silent. But let's be honest. Among scientists, there are people who understand that this issue is serious. They talk about it in private conversations, at small conferences, in carefully worded articles. They just don't say it out loud. Science knows how to answer the question, how? But with the question, what if we were wrong, it copes much worse. Human psychology is such that admitting our mistakes is very difficult. After all, then everything would have to be redone. This is a bit reminiscent of the situation with the theory of plate tectonics. It was proposed back in 1912, but it was only taken seriously in the 1960s. It took 50 years to acknowledge the obvious. And 9,000 kilometers from here, in Brazil, exactly the same story has been going on since the 1970s. But there, the story has an ending. A rare Byzantine seal. A rare lead Byzantine seal was found during excavations at the princely palace in the Bakhchisaray district of Crimea. A lead seal from the 9th century could have belonged to a Byzantine official at the princely palace in the former capital of the medieval Principality of Feodoro on the Mangup Plateau in the Bakhchisaray district of Crimea. According to him, lead seals that belong to important figures and officials of the Byzantine Empire are very rare and have extremely great historical significance. In addition, archaeologists discovered an almost intact ceramic amphora from the 9th-10th century, which was presumably used to store wine or water. Mangup is a medieval fortress city in the Bakhchisaray district of Crimea, which was the capital of the Principality of Theodoro, formed at the end of the 14th century. This year, archaeologists reached the layers of an earlier period, the 5th-7th centuries, when a powerful fortress was just beginning to form on the Mangup Plateau. In addition, archaeologists continue to study the burial ground dating back to the initial period of settlement of this area from the late 4th to the 7th century. Eggs of 3 types of creatures. In the Brazilian state of São Paulo, a very interesting site was discovered back in 2004, but serious excavations only began in 2021. And here's what they found there. 3 clutches of eggs dating from 66 to 105 million years ago, meaning from the time of the dinosaurs. The first clutch had 15 eggs, the second had 21, and the third had 47 eggs in one clutch. Nothing like this has ever been found anywhere in the world in the entire history of paleontology. The eggs belong to crocodile-like crocodilomorphs, an ancient group of reptiles that are ancestors of modern crocodiles. They have an ellipsoid shape with blunt ends and a shell thickness ranging from 0.3 to 0.8 mm. High porosity suggests the eggs developed in a humid, swampy environment. However, the most fascinating aspect is the location, not the eggs themselves. All 3 clutches are found in the same geological layer. This means they were laid at the same time and are positioned in a way that indicates colonial nesting. Near the crocodilomorph clutches, traces of nests of predatory theropod dinosaurs and ancient birds were found. Different species of reptiles nested here at the same time. Imagine a swamp 100 million years ago. In one place, literally just a few meters from each other, crocodilian reptiles, predatory dinosaurs, and the first birds are laying eggs at the same time. Completely different creatures that, in another situation, would simply eat each other. But here, each is busy with its own nest and doesn't bother its neighbor. Scientists still don't understand why this particular place attracted them all together. Maybe it's the special temperature of the soil, or maybe something else. But the fact is, this was something like a common maternity ward for several species at once. And this place lay untouched in the ground for 100 million years until they finally began to excavate it. Reichsgold. One of the sunken ships on Austria's Lake Toplitzsee hid its secret for decades. Depth, murky water, dangerous currents, an ideal hiding place. Rumors had been around for a long time. At the bottom, there were crates with gold, documents, and stolen works of art. But recently, there was a reason to take these rumors seriously again. Researchers discovered a sealed safe, estimated by some to contain up to 4 tons of gold. At first, I thought it was just another legend. Photos, footage, and documents, including some from CIA archives, later surfaced. Their data confirmed the ship carried special cargo that was never meant to fall into Allied hands. This isn't just wealth, it's a backup plan, a resource for escape, for recovery, for continuing in the shadows. We're talking about the legacy of the Reich in technology and ideas and people. But every legacy also has a material part, heavy, valuable, dangerous. And the fact that it was hidden in lakes, in mines, in glaciers, speaks to its scale. These weren't randomly hidden chests, this was a system. Stone cubes. Not far from Albuquerque, New Mexico, a group of tourists went out to the edge of a canyon. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary rock formation. The longer you look, the more it feels like something is off. The cliff's edges are perfectly straight and faces even, as if cut by something sharp, not by time. In some places, the stone masses form clear cubes. Each one weighs about 100 tons. There are no signs of human shaping, but none of nature's usual chaos either. Everything is too geometric. Comparisons immediately started online. Someone remembered the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, mysterious stone slabs going underwater. Others mentioned the megaliths of Baalbek. But still, the main reaction is the same. This looks wrong. It's too perfect to be natural, too heavy to be man-made. Of course, scientists can explain a lot: weathering, crystal geometry, pressure, faults, but visually, it's not convincing. Because when you stand next to these shapes, you don't get the feeling that nature made them. A question arises. If this is really artificial, then who made it, and why? This isn't the first or last place where nature seems to accidentally imitate someone's work. But sometimes you start to suspect that it's the other way around, that it's not nature imitating technology. We still don't know who was here before us. New discoveries in Egypt. Since we're in Egypt, here's another story, and it's important not so much because of what was found, but because of how it was found. Buto, or Tel El Farain, the Hill of the Pharaohs, the northern Nile Delta, a place with a 6,000-year history. This was one of the main religious centers of pre-dynastic Egypt. Here, they worshiped the cobra goddess Wajet, the protector of Lower Egypt, the very same cobra that the pharaoh wore on his crown. The problem with Buto is that it's almost impossible to excavate this place using traditional methods. Over 6,000 years, new buildings were constructed on top of the old ones. It turned into a layered cake of cultural deposits, all soaked with groundwater. And sticking a shovel in means you don't know which layer you'll hit or what you might destroy. Egyptian scientists decided not to dig blindly, but first to see what was actually there. They used satellites and special equipment that scans the ground like an X-ray and shows hidden objects without disturbing the soil. The image turned out clear. At a depth of several meters, there is a building about 25 by 25 meters in size. Then they made a small test excavation in one specific spot and saw exactly what they expected: brick walls, amulets, and ritual objects. Based on the findings, the building was dated to around the 7th century BC. The main thing here is not the discovery itself, but the fact that now it's possible to create a map of everything that lies beneath Buto before even touching the ground. We don't dig and look. We look first and then decide where to dig. And this changes everything because there are thousands of such places under the Nile Delta, most of which are being destroyed right now by rising groundwater and construction. The oldest coins in the world. During the excavations in Henan province, a group of Chinese archaeologists discovered the world's oldest mint for metal coins. Scientists have already stated that this mint and the coins found in it are the oldest of all they have ever managed to find. According to the scientists, the mint was built in 770 BC. The plant produced items not only from copper, but also from other alloys. This indicates that it was technically equipped and well organized. The building has not been fully excavated, so the scientists are not disclosing its area at this time. Currently, research focuses only on the excavated section, yet many finds have been made there, such as vessel remains and casting molds. These include weapons, tools, and jewelry. The discovered coins do not resemble our modern ones. In appearance, they were more like a spade, measuring 13 by 15 centimeters. But despite how they look, they can't be used in agriculture. They're too fragile for that. They had various inscriptions on them, each indicating a certain denomination. Such coins were in circulation until one day Emperor Sin decided to abolish them. Before this discovery, the oldest coins were considered to be those found in Turkey. The coins found in Turkey were issued around 600 BC and belonged to the Lydian kingdom. This new discovery changes everything fundamentally. The mausoleum of Imam Reza is one of the most important religious complexes in the Islamic world and a center of pilgrimage for millions of Shiites. The architecture of the complex impresses with its grandeur and refined decorative work. Its magnificence reflects many centuries of Iranian history, during which the complex was repeatedly rebuilt and decorated. The mosaic work, mirror panels, and golden domes that adorn the mausoleum create an atmosphere that transports visitors to another world of spirituality and tranquility. Every millimeter of space seems to come alive with light, reflected from thousands of mirror fragments, creating the illusion of infinity. The complex includes not only the mausoleum itself, but also mosques, libraries, museums, and religious schools. Valuable manuscripts, relics, and works of art are kept here, symbolizing the rich cultural heritage of Iran. One of the most mystical features of the mausoleum is the ancient legend that prayers offered here are answered. Pilgrims from all over the world come to the tomb to ask for health, forgiveness, or a miracle. The first astronomical observatory. The recently discovered ancient Egyptian observatory, the first of its kind, demonstrates the Egyptians' profound knowledge of astronomy and their close connection with spiritual and ritual practices. This is the largest and the first known observatory in the history of Egypt. The remains of a 6th century BC structure were found 3 years ago during excavations in the ancient city of Buto, now known as Tel El Farain, in the Kafr El Sheikh Governorate. Everything we found exceeded our expectations, said Qassam Ghanim, director of the Kafr El Sheikh Antiquities Authority and head of the archaeological mission. Archaeologists discovered the ruins of an L-shaped mud brick building covering an area of about 850 square meters. The eastern entrance leads to a place where sunlight illuminated the observation point for the sun and stars, where the priest astronomer stood. His image has been preserved on the walls, facing the rising sun, depicting the connection of the ancient Egyptians with the cosmos. Initially, researchers thought they had discovered a temple, but the discovery of artifacts and inscriptions related to astronomy, such as sundials and other time-measuring instruments, led to the conclusion that this was an observatory. Inside the hall, astronomical images of the sunrise and sunset throughout the 3 seasons were found. The artifacts found, such as statues of Horus and Osiris, as well as a bronze figurine of Osiris with a snake, confirm the importance of the spiritual and scientific role of the observatory. 460 years at the bottom of the Baltic. In 1563, the Swedish king Erik XIV built a ship that was supposed to change the balance of power in the Baltic. Mars, 48 meters long, 1,800 tons, 107 guns on board. One of the first 3-masted giants in Europe, the flagship of the fleet, which even enemies were afraid to see on the horizon. The Danes and the Germans understood that in an open battle with such a ship, they had no chance at all. On May 30, 1564, Mars engaged in battle with the Danish-German fleet. The first day belonged to the Swedes. Their artillery literally swept away everything in its path. But on the second day, the weather turned bad. The Swedish squadron scattered, and the huge Mars was left alone against the entire enemy squadron. The German ships chose a clever tactic. They didn't sail into cannon range, but started bombarding the flagship's deck with incendiary shells filled with a mixture of sulfur, resin, and saltpeter. While the Swedes were putting out the fire, about 300 boarders from Lübeck in Denmark landed on deck. And in the heat of the hand-to-hand fight, the fire reached the powder magazine. The explosion was so powerful that the bow of the ship was found 40 meters from the main hull. Along with the Mars, 700 to 800 Swedes and several hundred Germans went to the bottom. The ship that was supposed to change the history of the Baltic served exactly 1 day in battle. The ship lay at the bottom of the Baltic for more than 460 years and was preserved in amazingly good condition. Cold, brackish water, weak currents. And most importantly, there are no shipworms in the Baltic Sea, which destroy wooden hulls in other seas. Scientists found deformed bronze cannons there, damaged by explosions, incendiary grenades, boarding hooks that had previously only been seen in old paintings, and bones with saber marks. The Baltic Sea preserved not just a ship, but a complete picture of a 16th century naval battle, with all the details that history usually doesn't preserve. Ancient means of payment. A bronze coin attributed to Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea, was minted between 26 and 36 AD during the reign of the Roman Emperor Tiberius. This small artifact is a vivid symbol of the power and influence of the Roman Empire in the territory of ancient Judea. Coins from this period reflect not only economic activity, but also the political and religious aspects of the era. On the obverse side of the coin, there was usually an image of a cult object associated with Roman gods, which emphasized Rome's desire to impose its culture. However, this caused conflicts with the local Jewish population, for whom images associated with pagan beliefs could be considered blasphemous. On the reverse side of the coin, symbols such as the cornucopia or drums were often depicted, symbolizing prosperity and control. The inscriptions on the coin mention Tiberius, reinforcing his authority as a ruler. They found the remains of D'Artagnan. The real D'Artagnan's name was Charles de Batz de Castelmore, and he really existed. He served in the Royal Musketeers under Louis XIV, was close to the king, and died in 1673 during the siege of the Dutch monarch's siege of Maastricht. According to historical sources, he was killed right on the battlefield. His body was buried somewhere in the city, but no one recorded exactly where, or the records simply did not survive. For almost 400 years, hardly anyone knew anything about his grave. And then, during restoration work in one of the old Maastricht churches, workers came across a skeleton. Fragments of a musket ball were found in the chest area. A French coin was lying next to the body. And by all indications, the age of the burial matches the date of D'Artagnan's death. DNA samples have now been sent for analysis, and there is still no official confirmation. Science is in no hurry to make bold claims without definitive proof. But researchers say there are too many coincidences to consider this a mere accident. Think about this. Alexandre Dumas wrote The Three Musketeers in 1844. That was 170 years after the real person's death. The novel became one of the most widely read in the world. Billions of people know the name D'Artagnan from movies, TV series, and plays. And yet no one knew where his remains were until last year. If you've come across a similar story, a random discovery that turned out to be a huge breakthrough, write about it in the comments. It would be interesting to make a full video about such stories. Merlin's parchment. Archives often look boring. Dusty folders, invoices, the names of long-forgotten people. That's how it was in the county of Suffolk, in an old English estate, an ordinary 16th century ledger. And suddenly under the leather cover an inscription appears, an old French text with red and blue initials. The archivist stops. An investigation begins, which will lead to Britain's most mysterious legend, the story of Merlin and King Arthur. The parchment is a fragment from a 13th century manuscript created when Knights of the Round Table legends were most popular. This section is from the Suite Vulgate du Merlin cycle. The plot describes how Merlin acted after Arthur's coronation. Fewer than 40 such copies have survived, and each one is unique. But this one was sewn into the cover as a lining, because in the 16th century, old parchments were often used for book bindings. Paper was expensive. Scientists couldn't touch the find. It was too fragile. That's when technology came into play. Multispectral imaging revealed the faded ink. An X-ray, originally created for studying fossils, allowed researchers to look inside the book. And it became clear, this is a new scene, previously unknown. 2 episodes. In the first episode, Gawain fights pagan kings at Cambenek. In the second, during a feast, a blind harpist with a white dog appears. He enchants everyone. He requests permission to carry the standard in battle, then vanishes. Later, it's revealed to be Merlin, who altered events. Magic, disguise, legend. But that's not the main point. The main point is that all of this could have remained hidden in the cover forever. A story written by monks 7 centuries ago has survived dozens of generations, wars, and oblivion. And it surfaced only because one person noticed a strange pattern on old leather. An ancient dagger from a mysterious civilization. In India, archaeologists discovered several ancient burials and structures during excavations in the state of Tamil Nadu, indicating the existence of a thriving city at this site. In one of the graves, a blade associated with a mysterious civilization was discovered. Archaeologists have discovered new evidence in the village of Kantagai in southern India that about 2,500 years ago, there was a city at the site of this village. It belonged to an unknown civilization, and judging by the artifacts found, it was quite large and prosperous. The reason for its collapse has yet to be determined. One of the most valuable finds was an iron dagger. It is heavily covered with rust, but its wooden handle has been fairly well preserved. The dagger was inside a burial urn, along with the cremated remains, probably of a warrior. The blade was about 40 centimeters long. Unfortunately, corrosion caused it to break in half. Still, the artifact gave scientists valuable information. According to Sivanandam, the director of the Department of Archaeology of Tamil Nadu State, this type of weapon was used by warriors during the Sangam period. Approximately from the 3rd century BC to the 3rd century AD, the artifact has been sent for laboratory analysis. Experts say that part of the wooden handle has been preserved almost in its original form. The unusually high degree of wood preservation allows researchers to date the dagger with an accuracy of just a few years. This dating is planned to be carried out in one of the laboratories in the United States where advanced equipment is available. Scientists suggest that the modern village of Kantagai, about 2,500 years ago, could have been one of the cities of the Kaladi civilization. Traces of this people were previously discovered in the nearby villages of Agaram, Manulur, and Kaladi, the place that gave its name to this mysterious civilization. An unknown god of ancient Egypt. Here's a name you have probably never heard. Pelusium, an ancient Egyptian city on the eastern border of the Nile Delta, Egypt's first line of defense against Eastern invasion, and at the same time, a major port city through which everyone passed: Persians, Greeks, Romans, and Arabs. Whoever controlled Pelusium controlled the entrance to Egypt. Today, this place is called Tel El Farama, and Egyptian archaeologists have been excavating here for 6 years. Recently, they found a round temple with a huge pool in the center, 35 meters in diameter. That's about half the size of a football field. The pool was connected by a canal to one of the branches of the Nile, and the water came there on its own, murky and rich with silt. Around the pool, there was a whole network of canals and reservoirs to control the flow of water, and right in the center stood a square platform on which most likely stood a large statue of a deity. To whom was this temple dedicated? To a god named Pelusium. He is so little known that most historians have never heard of him. His name is presumably derived from the Greek word pelos, meaning mud, clay, or silt. In other words, he is the god of Nile silt, a symbol of fertility and renewal. Every year, the Nile would flood and leave a layer of fertile silt on its banks, without which Egypt simply could not have survived. A round temple with a living pool was built for this god, breathing in sync with the river. The architecture of the temple shows traces of several cultures at once: Egyptian layout, Greek proportions, Roman details, which is quite expected for a city at the crossroads of civilization. The temple was used from the 2nd century BC to the 6th century AD, almost 800 years, surviving the transition from the Ptolemies to Rome and from Rome to Byzantium. They found it using a satellite and special equipment that scans the ground like an X-ray, showing what's inside without digging. The scan revealed a large building several meters underground. Then they made a small test excavation and found brick walls, amulets depicting Egyptian gods, and a scarab with the name of Pharaoh Thutmose III, who lived 1,000 years before this temple was built, but was revered as a saint for a very long time after his death. For almost 800 years, this basin was filled with water from the Nile. People came here to pray, bringing amulets and offerings, and then everything was covered with sand, and it lay buried for another 1,500 years until a satellite looked down from above. Egyptian towers. When people think of the homes of ancient Egyptians, most imagine squat huts made of mud brick. Excavations in Amet in the northern delta radically changed this picture. Archaeologists uncovered a district from the late period, an entire street of tower houses, 4 to 5 stories high, forming a dense wall along the processional road to the Temple of Wajet. The height is estimated at 12 to 15 meters, which for the 7th century BC is equivalent to a modern 5-story building. The lower levels are packed with grain silos and beer vats. Above are living rooms with narrow chimneys. Higher up are covered terraces, where date pits and bronze sistrums associated with the goddess Hathor have been preserved. In the evening, they not only ate here but also performed rituals accompanied by music. 5 steps from the doors, a limestone promenade leads to the Temple of Wajet. The slabs are polished so well that even today they reflect the setting sun. And the cult columns stand exactly where the craftsmen of the 7th century BC placed them. It's like a real mini Memphis in the province. Dense, high-rise buildings, a market, a temple, and a sacred road, all in one cramped block. 3 repair layers in the masonry show that the towers lasted at least a century and a half. And on the facades, you can still see reliefs with Harpocrates and a green faience Ushabti. It's a sign that religion and daily life literally shared the same wall here. And Matt breaks the old stereotype about single-story Egypt. An entire city at the bottom of a lake. Kyrgyzstan's mountain lake Issyk-Kul is one of the largest in the world. It stretches almost 200 kilometers surrounded by the ridges of the Tian Shan Mountains. It doesn't freeze even in winter because of its salinity and depth. In 2023 and 2024, a group of diver researchers explored the underwater area near the shore. And what they described in the expedition report sounds like the plot of an adventure movie. At the bottom of the lake, there are streets, brick buildings, and furnace complexes. Beneath the layers of loose sand, there is a well-preserved cultural layer, literally permeated with traces of human activity. Fragments of bricks, ceramics, animal bones, and slag from metal smelting. Next to the buildings, they discovered a Muslim necropolis from the 13th, 14th centuries. The cemetery measures 300 by 200 meters, neat and well-preserved. People lived here, traded, buried their dead, and then the water came and covered the entire city. The Tian Shan Mountains are seismically active, and geologists link the flooding to a major earthquake in the 15th century. The shore subsided, the water level rose, and the city disappeared. Apparently, there were few casualties. People managed to leave in time. After that, the shores of Issyk-Kul continued to be used by nomadic tribes. Small villages still stand here to this day. But here's what's important. For centuries, trade routes of the Silk Road passed around this lake. The main route went from the Chui Valley through the Beetle Pass into China. And Issyk-Kul was not just a lake, it was a crossroads where merchants from dozens of countries met. Silks, spices, metals, and ideas were traded here. And now, this trading post on one of the main routes of the medieval world lies several meters underwater, along with streets, ovens, and a cemetery. Underwater excavations have only just begun, and researchers say that the well-preserved cultural layer promises many more discoveries. No one knows exactly what else lies there yet. A knife handle in the shape of a gladiator. Archaeologists found a rare artifact, a handle from a folding copper knife in the form of a miniature gladiator. The find is more than 2,000 years old. It was discovered by divers in the River Tyne near Corbridge, a Roman settlement established in Northumberland next to Hadrian's Wall. This is rare evidence that admiration for Roman gladiators reached even the outskirts of the empire. The handle depicts a secutor gladiator, a powerful warrior in heavy armor with a closed helmet and large weapon. The unique feature of the figurine is that it depicts a left-handed person, which is surprising because in ancient Rome, this was considered a bad omen. It is possible that the figurine represents a specific warrior who was specially trained to use his left hand in order to gain an advantage in the arena. Gladiators, despite often being slaves or convicted criminals, could become real stars of their time. Their battles attracted crowds of spectators to the amphitheaters, and victories turned the fighters into legends. Even today, their romanticized image continues to attract attention, as proven by the success of movies like Gladiator. How the hilt ended up in the river and who its owner was remains a mystery. Dogs as family members. Peru, northern coast, the settlement of Castillo de Warmay, one of the centers of the Wari Empire, which existed from around 600 to 1050 AD, several centuries before the Incas. Scientists studied burials here, and among the human bones, they found animal bones. 341 bones, at least 20 individuals of different ages, from puppies to adult animals. There are no signs of butchering here. These dogs were not eaten, they were buried. They found 3 individuals among the bones with congenitally missing premolars. This trait, which is found in modern Peruvian hairless dogs, is associated with a genetic mutation that is also responsible for hairlessness. Therefore, based on this trait, scientists concluded that what they had before them were indeed Peruvian hairless dogs, the very breed that tourists now photograph in Lima. Before this discovery, the only evidence of the breed's existence in the Wari Empire was a ceramic vessel depicting a hairless dog. But the most interesting part is something else. Isotope analysis of the bones showed that in their puppyhood, these 3 dogs had the same diet as children from noble Wari families, the same chemical composition, the same food. They were literally fed like children from noble families, and when the owner died, the dog would go with him. In one burial, a dog's paw had been amputated while it was still alive. Scientists believe this was part of a ritual, preparing the animal for the role of tomb guardian. Another dog was buried next to a teenager. The third was buried next to a craftsman who had all his working tools in the grave. For the people of Wari, a dog was a member of the family in the most literal sense. It ate at the same table as its owner. It lived nearby all its life and accompanied him after death. And we know all this thanks to the bones from a 1,000-year-old grave. Before this discovery, no one could have even guessed that this breed of dog existed at that time. Shamans predict disaster. In Mexico, one of the ancient pyramids used by ancient tribes for human sacrifices collapsed, which raised concerns about an impending disaster. The descendants of the tribe that built the pyramid feared that the collapse could be a harbinger of a major disaster caused by natural forces or some other phenomenon. In the photos from the scene, you can see that part of the structure collapsed after a heavy rain that occurred recently. The downpour washed away one side of the pyramid. These pyramids were built by the ancestors of the modern Purépecha, a warlike people who once managed to defeat the Aztecs. Historians claim that the Yakata pyramids were used by the Purépecha tribe for ritual sacrifices to their main god, Kurikveri. Anthropologist Tariquiri Alvarez stated that the collapse of the pyramid is a bad omen. Local shamans believe that even the fall of a single stone was a bad omen, and the collapse of an entire wall means an inevitable disaster. A similar phenomenon was observed before the arrival of the conquistadors. Lacquered coffin. In 2018, archaeologists in China's Jiangsu province discovered a unique 700-year-old lacquered coffin from the Yuan dynasty. Its bright red surface was perfectly preserved thanks to the multi-layer lacquer coating, which protected the wood from moisture and decay. Lacquered coffins were a symbol of high status in China, and their creation required complex techniques. The lacquer was applied in several layers and then polished to a shine. This method of preservation allowed the coffin to survive for centuries with almost no damage. The discovery is also important because there are relatively few burials from the Yuan dynasty, and this coffin can tell us a lot about the burial traditions of that time. DNA of living beings from space. Where did life come from? This is a question humanity has been trying to answer ever since it learned how to ask questions. In 2020, the Japanese probe, Hayabusa 2, returned to Earth with samples of material from the asteroid Ryugu, a small capsule with a few grams of material and several years of analysis. The results were announced recently, and they turned out to be unexpected, even for the scientists who were waiting for them. In the samples from Ryugu, they found exactly the molecules that make up the genetic code of any living creature on Earth. Everything needed to record and transmit information about life. Not something similar, not random organic substances, but exactly those very building blocks that make up any living cell, plus ammonia, which is also considered one of the key substances for the origin of life. Ryugu is not the only such asteroid. An American scientist studied another asteroid, Bennu, and found the same thing there. This suggests that such molecules form in space on their own, in absolute cold and vacuum, without any of the conditions that we consider necessary for life. 4 billion years ago, asteroids were constantly falling onto the young Earth, and among them, there were surely some just like Ryugu. It's possible that life on our planet didn't originate here from scratch, but arrived here already formed, like a set of parts that just needed to be assembled under the right conditions. No one is saying that life exists everywhere in the universe. That hasn't been proven. But the molecules that make up each of us are now traveling inside thousands of asteroids somewhere in the darkness between the planets. And what do you think about the theory that we are guests on Earth and came here from other planets? Write in the comments. The burial of the celestial guest. In 1901, an expedition of British archaeologists led by Lord Williams Campbell was conducting excavations in one of the ancient tombs in the desert, not far from the Pyramid of Giza. When they opened the massive sarcophagus, the investigators made a sensational discovery. Inside was a mummy that was significantly different from all the known remains of ancient Egypt. The height of the being exceeded 2.5 meters, and its skull was unusually elongated and narrow, resembling the depictions of gods on the walls of Egyptian temples. The bones were much denser than human bones and showed increased strength. suggesting adaptation to different conditions. The strangest thing was that there were no traces of embalming or autopsy on the body, yet it was perfectly preserved, as if it had been in stasis. Archaeologists found engravings on the sarcophagus referencing a messenger from the stars who came during the pharaoh's era. The hieroglyphs hinted at beings who descended from the sky and taught the ancient Egyptians architecture and astronomy. Some of the symbols resembled star maps, and on the inner walls of the tomb there were images of flying disc-shaped objects. This discovery gave rise to many theories, ranging from alternative history about Egypt's connection with extraterrestrial civilizations to speculation about a loss suffered by the human race. However, shortly after the excavation, the artifact disappeared without a trace. It was sent to a private collection, and mentions of it were quickly erased from official reports. Man-made caves underground. England, Shropshire, Cainton Hall Estate. If you walk across the field and look carefully at your feet, you can notice a small hole in the ground, like a rabbit hole. But this burrow leads down into a large underground hall, and then into the next one, and then into an entire system of man-made rooms carved into the red sandstone, with arched ceilings, niches, and columns. The official Cainton caves are dated to the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Someone put in an incredible amount of effort to carve out these halls. The exact purpose is unknown, maybe for storage, maybe as a place of solitude. But popular rumor has long connected this place with the Templars, the Catholic military order founded in the 12th century, which in 200 years became the wealthiest organization of the medieval world. In 1337, the French king, Philip IV, arrested the order's leadership. Torture and executions began. The order was dissolved. And to this day, no one knows what happened to the Templar treasures. In shape, the halls really do resemble Romanesque chapels. Low arches, a certain symmetry, niches where statues could have stood. In 2012, the entrance was sealed off because of vandals and people who used the underground halls for occult rituals. Traces of candles and devilish symbols were found on the walls here. In 2017, a photographer published pictures of these halls from the inside, and the caves instantly spread all over the internet. Most likely, it's just a beautiful place that was built in the 19th century by some wealthy landowner with a vivid imagination. There were never any Templars there, but here's what's interesting. Even if you remove all the legends, the question remains. Someone put in a huge amount of effort to carve several neat halls with arches and niches into the rock. Why here? Why like this? And why at all? No one really knows to this day. The tomb of an unknown pharaoh. In Egypt, not far from the city of Abydos, archaeologists found the tomb of a pharaoh that is about 3,600 years old. It is located 7 meters deep in an ancient necropolis known as the Mountain of Anubis. The tomb turned out to be almost empty. Most likely it was looted back in ancient times. The name of the pharaoh was written on the plaster at the entrance, but it has not survived to this day. Scientists suggest that it could be one of the lesser-known rulers. For example, Sennaib or Pentageni, who are mentioned in other sources but whose burials have not yet been found. The tomb dates back to the Second Intermediate Period, a difficult time in Egypt's history when the country was divided into several kingdoms and was in political chaos. One of these regional kingdoms was the Abydos dynasty, whose representatives may have been buried in this area. Interestingly, the new tomb is built into the complex of the earlier and more influential pharaoh Neferhotep III. Architecturally, it resembles both the tombs of the Middle Kingdom and those from later periods. Forgot where he hid the coins. In 1988, American engineer and oceanographer Tommy Thompson did what treasure hunters around the world dream of. He found a sunken ship with gold. The steamship SS Central America sank in 1857 during a hurricane off the coast of South Carolina. There were tons of gold on board. It was mined at the California gold fields during the gold rush and sent to the eastern part of the country. The total value of the cargo today is estimated at about $500 million. Thompson developed a deep-sea robot specifically for this search. He found the wreck site at a depth of more than 2 kilometers. He recovered the main part of the treasure and in 2000 sold a batch of gold for $52 million. And then it turned out that 161 investors who had invested more than $22 million in the project didn't get a cent, and that 500 of the rarest gold coins disappeared from the inventory, which collectors estimate to be worth tens of millions of dollars. Because the gold from a sunken 19th century ship isn't just gold, it's history and rarity, for which people paid dozens of times more than the metal's value at auction. In 2012, when the case was heading to court, Thompson disappeared. They searched for him for 3 years and found in a Florida hotel. To all questions about the fate of the coins, he had only one answer. He doesn't remember where they are. He said he registered them in someone else's name in Belize and lost track due to memory issues. The court took an unusual action. He was imprisoned not for a crime, but for refusing to answer a question. With no specific term and no release date, you just sit there until you talk. Thompson spent 10 years in prison. He paid a $1,000 fine every day. His health kept getting worse, but he continued to remain silent. In March 2026, he was released for medical reasons because they could no longer keep the old man locked up. He is 74 years old. The 500 coins were never found, and apparently, from the very beginning, he decided that 10 years of silence was more profitable than any other option, and it looks like he was right. A seated burial and a children's necropolis. In the French city of Dijon, archaeologists have discovered a unique burial of Gauls that is more than 2,000 years old. The uniqueness of the find lies in the fact that all the deceased are seated facing west. This is a rare ritual known from only a few sites in France and Switzerland. The excavations were carried out in the garden of an old monastery, where archaeologists came across 13 burials. The deceased are seated with their hands on their thighs, and their legs arranged asymmetrically. The burials are dated to the period between 450 and 25 BC. Researchers suggest that these graves may have contained priests, chiefs, or members of the same family. Next to these burials, a children's necropolis from the 1st century AD was found, where 22 infants were buried. Many of them did not live even a year. Some children were buried in wooden coffins, as evidenced by the nails that were found. Coins and ceramics were also discovered in the graves, probably as burial offerings. However, part of the cemetery was destroyed due to agricultural work. The reason for the seated burial remains a mystery. One theory is connected to the belief in the afterlife. It is possible that the deceased were supposed to enter the afterlife in a special posture. Other researchers believe that this is part of a spiritual practice. The posture could have symbolized meditation or eternal rest. This is supported by Celtic figurines found in different parts of Europe. The mysterious pyramids of Sidinga. This complex, discovered by archaeologists at the end of the 20th century, includes more than 80 pyramids, making it one of the largest burial sites in the Nubian desert, which is in Sudan. The Sidinga pyramids were built during a period when Nubia was under the influence of ancient Egypt, and the rulers of the kingdom of Kush sought to imitate Egyptian traditions and architecture. Most of the Sidinga pyramids are small in size compared to the Egyptian pyramids, with an average height ranging from 3 to 7 meters. They were built from sandstone and brick and were used as burial places for the nobility and members of the ruling elite. Archaeologists have found ceramics, jewelry, as well as mummy remains in these pyramids, which indicates the high level of skill of Nubian craftsmen. One of the mysteries of the Sidinga pyramids is their large number in a relatively small area, which makes this complex unique. The construction of such a large number of pyramids may indicate the important religious and cultural significance of this place for the ancient Nubians. Sidinga was also a place of worship for the goddess Hathor, who played a key role in the religious life of Nubia. A temple for the lion-headed goddess in Egypt, in the area of Athribis, an ancient temple carved into the rock, was discovered. Its age is estimated to be about 2,100 years, and it dates back to the reign of Ptolemy VIII, who ruled from 170 to 116 BC. This ruler, known for his complex political and family history, left behind many monuments, and the new temple has become an important discovery. Bas-reliefs have been preserved on the walls of the temple, depicting Ptolemy VIII making an offering to the lion-headed goddess Repit and her son Calant. Repit was the wife of the god Minra, who was associated with fertility. Archaeologists believe that the temple was built for this goddess, although its name remains unknown for now. During the excavation, scientists discovered a hall where temple utensils and amphorae were stored. Unique bas-reliefs depicting Repit and Minra were found at the entrance to the room. Of particular interest is the depiction of Minra surrounded by deacons, the stars that ancient Egyptians used to navigate at night. These stars have human bodies combined with the heads of animals, such as a falcon and an ibis. Crystal figures from Krustalka. And now, the last story, but let me warn you right away. There is no mainstream science here, no academic articles, and no confirmed sources either. Everything you're about to hear are stories told by people who claim they were there and saw it all. I'm telling you this honestly, take it not as a fact, but as a story. But it's a story that simply can't be ignored. Peru's highlands have hard-to-reach rock caves, according to those who say they've been there. In one of the rock chambers, there are figures about 3 meters tall, made of transparent rock crystal, pure quartz, with a strength that is almost impossible to find in nature in such large volumes. Inside each figure, you can see thin channels and structures that resemble something living. It's as if there are vessels or nerves running inside the stone, and devices placed near these figures supposedly detect some kind of rhythmic signal coming from within. The locals call this place the Hall of Sleeping Guides and avoid it. They say that if you touch it, some kind of balance will be disturbed. Those who came there with various equipment talk about electronic malfunctions and strange behavior of their devices. And during the full moon, they say a low hum appears in the cave, so deep that you feel it not with your ears, but with your whole body, and all communication is lost within several kilometers. Then they stopped letting people in as the military closed access. None of this has been confirmed. It's quite possible that this is just a story passed down by word of mouth, and with each retelling it gets new details. Mountainous Peru shouldn't be blamed. It's a hard-to-reach place. Legends are easily born there. But here's something to think about. Every year, they find something that seemed impossible just yesterday. Flooded cities, temples of unknown gods, traces of people where no one expected to find them. The crystal figures are most likely a legend. But the line between legend and discovery is sometimes thinner than it seems. I wonder, what do all these stories have in common? Thompson hid the gold on purpose and took the secret with him to prison for 10 years. The ship sank on the very first day of battle and lay there for 400 years. An entire city went underwater in a single night after an earthquake. Ancient beavers built perfect spirals 20 years ago, and no one suspected it. And nobody knew about it until the 19th century. Somewhere a person hides something, somewhere loses it, and somewhere just forgets. And time decides for itself whether it will be found or not. And judging by what we find every year, time is still on our side. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. A new video is coming soon.